Begin the current Daf, Mesechtes Nazir Daf Ches. We begin on the top line of the Amud. We begin the next Mishnah, continue the theme of the previous Mishnah. Is really the whole topic of this parak, which actually continues into the next parak, is all about deviations or abnormal or ways of understanding how a person can make a Kabbalah, what is going to be included in his Kabbalahs of his Nazirs. Sure, corresponds to Bekazak and Cheskel, turn to Daf Chaim. For today's daf. Something discussed in today's daf. We have a machlekes. If someone says, Hareini Nazir, someone says, I am a Nazir, Kisar Roishi, like the hairs on my head. So what is he being Mekabel? Is he being Mekabel near Nazirs Harbe? Many different Nazirs for every single strand of hair? Or is it Nazirs Achazarucha Kibel? It's accepting one long Nazirs of the amount of hair that he has. Also regarding a case of Hareini Nazir Malay Abayis. If someone says, if I'm a Nazir as full as this house, so Beit can I say, actually someone had asked previously, like, well, why don't we just ask him? And he's not even here now, so we can't hear the answer. So why don't we ask him? So the Mishnah actually does talk about a case like that, where we ask him, we check. He says, well, I meant to say, there was one big one, so then Nazir Lamed Yom. But if, let's say, he says, Stam Nazart, he says, Ich weiß nicht, das habe ich gesagt. This is what I said. So then, we actually look at it stringently, and that's going to be the Gemara's discussion. We look at the box or the house, whatever it is, as if it's full with mustard seeds. So that's how much Nazir he's going to have for the rest of his life. So Taka, that he had asked a good question, that it actually depends. Sometimes we will ask him. Also, the Gemara is going to discuss that why we're looking at it full with mustard seeds? Look at it full of melons, tablet takanta, and there's episode remedy. There's not going to be so much. Why are we looking at it in such a stringent way? Additionally, we have a machlekes in the Mishnah regarding someone says Kimini Mesachama. Also, same idea. We have this between the Tanoim, that if he says I want to be Nazir as the days of the years of the solar year. So again, is it Nazir's Harba Kibel? Is that amount of Naziris as the amount of days of the year, which is 365 times 30, or is it Nazir's Achazar Kibel? No, one long Naziris, not separate Naziris. And the Gemara concludes with a halacha unrelated to our Masechta per se, but it comes into the discussion of base Tatargir and Mitame ben Negoim. Only a house that is a four-sided house is Mitame ben Negoim, but if it's round, or if it's two sides, or three sides, or five sides, pentagon, then it's not going to be Mitame ben Negoim. So we begin the current Daf Ches, on the top of the Amud. We begin the next Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Hareini Nazir Kisar Reishi. If someone says, I am a Nazir like the hairs on my head, or Ucha'afah ha'aretz, like the dust on the earth, or like the sand by the sea. Says the Mishnah, halacha is, Hareze Nazir Olam. He is a Nazir forever, Umegaleach achas l'shloshim yom. And he cuts his hair once in every 30 days. Which means to say, essentially, he's mekabel many Naziros, as much as the dust on the earth or the sand by the sea, and on day 30, that's a stam Nazir is 30 days. He's just taking that many Naziris. Every 30 days, he cuts his hair, he brings his kabbalah, and he goes again and again and again. Obviously, he's not going to make it out of this lifetime not being a Nazir, because definitely the sands or the hairs on his head are way more than, that's how many Nazirs are more than how many years he has on this planet. Now, that's the opinion of the Tanna Kama. However, Rabbi Omer, he says, no. Ein ze megaleach achas l'shloshim yom. He's not going to be cutting his hair once every 30 days. And the reason is because Rebbe holds that he didn't accept many Nazirais. He accepted one large Nazirais, as many sands there are on the earth, until the day that he dies, until he specifies explicitly in the plurality of Nazirais, as he continues his teaching. He says, who is going to be the individual that's going to cut his hair once every 30 days? Nazirais, not Hareini Nazir. He says, I'm accepting upon myself Nazirais, that's how many Nazirais he's going to be taking. Oh, okay, so then each strand is a unit of 30 days. That's a stam Nazirais. Only then will you be cutting your hair every 30 days. But if you say, Hareini Nazir kafar, no, that's not saying they're separate Naziras, and therefore he disagrees regarding the hair cutting of every 30 days. That's one case. Continues the Mishnah. Let's say he says, Hareini Nazir Maloh Habayis. I am a Nazir as the fullness of this house. Or Maloh HaKumpah, or the fullness of this box. In other words, it's an empty box or an empty house that's over here, and he's saying, that's how much of a Nazir I'm going to be. What does this mean? Says the Mishnah, Boid Kenoisai, So we inspect him, we check him out. We ask him, and what did you mean by this? If he says, oh, I went and I took a naziris of one long naziris, meaning that he considers this as something as a very big. So then the halacha is nazir lamayem. He's a nazir for 30 days. Why is he nazir for 30 days? So he's a nazir for 30 days because he took one naziris. Why is he saying malay habayis? Malay habayis is just because he's saying that's how big of an effort it seems to me. As we had said this idea previously when he says achas gedola, achas ketana, he's just saying that's how it feels for me. Now, v'mama stam nazalti, but let's say he says, no, I don't know what I was saying. I just said unspecific. This is what I said. So again, now he's leaving his words open for interpretation. What did you mean when you said these words? We have to now, chachamim, we have to go and take it to the most appropriate interpretation. So, and we'll see exactly why this is the most appropriate, but this is what we say. Oh, you didn't know what you were saying? So, now we see this box, as if it's filled with mustard seed, and he's a nazir his entire life. Now, as Tosfos points out, according to Rabbanan, we had mentioned on the previous daf, it's going to be naziris acha naziris, meaning what we just said here in our Mishnah itself also. In the Mishnah, we said that when you say something that's so much, like mustard seeds, like we said, like the heroes on the head, so what does that mean? You said harini nazir, you didn't say naziris. So again, the Tosfos just pointed out, meaning with this machlok we just had a moment ago, according to Rebbe, it's one long naziris. According to Rabban, it's going to be naziris ach naziris. Again, it's not the main point, but the Tosfos just explaining what would that mean, nazir kol yamam. Would it be one long naziris, or would it be that of many naziris? But be that as it may, we're going to translate and interpret when you said malay habayis, malay kupa, as if it's filled with mustard seeds, and that's how much naziris you're going to have. Another case, says the Mishnah, which we already quoted previously, is harini nazir. Someone says, I am a nazir, mikan ad makam pleni. From here up until that place. So we evaluate how many days does it take to get from here to there, and as follows. If the distance is less than 30 days, so you're driving to Texas, so it's less than 30 days, and only nazir for 30 days, because just like when someone says I'm a nazir for 1 day, the minimum you could be is 30 days. So if it's a traveling time of 10 days to drive there, so that'll be nazir 30 days. Now, but let's say it's not less than 30, rather it takes 50 days to travel, then nazir kimin hayamim. Then he's going to be nazir according to the amount of days that it takes to get there, which we had explained this in the previous daf, was talking about what's called shehirsik baderech. He was on his way, he's traveling, and he says, so we assume what he intends to say is to protect himself as long as he's traveling. So therefore, it's the amount of time that it takes to get over there. That's a very simple halacha. Now, the next case of the Mishnah, if someone says, Hareini Nazir Kimini Yemaisachama. I am a Nazir according to the number of days there are in the solar year. So it's a machlekes again. Says the Tanakama, Meini Naziris Kimini Yemaisachama. So he counts Naziris according to the number of the days of the year, which means to say, 365 months he will be a Nazir. One after the other, again, cutting his hair and being karbanis between them, because since he said kiminyan, it sounds like nazirais, and not one long nazirais. It's not like for the years of a solar year. It's not just 365 days. No, it's 365 units of nazirais, because he said the word minyan. Minyan is telling you that the numbers over here of separate units, and therefore says the Tanakama that's how many times of 30 you're going to be a nazir. And Amr Rabbi Yehuda says, and Yehuda says the Tosfos is coming to support the Tanakama, and he says, Maisahaya, he's talking to such a story, the Chamim obligated this individual many naziris, and Kibin Shehishlim Meis. Once he finished it, which obviously took a long time, because you're going, that's even that itself with 365 times 30, so, and then he finished it, and then he died. That was the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, going back to one of the cases that the Mishnah described. We said if someone says, Hareini Nazir Malay Hakupi, says if I'm a Nazir, the amount of the box, and we checked him out. And he didn't say, oh, I meant, that's how big it is for me to deal with it, and then it's just one Naziris. No. He says, I said it's done. So the Gemara says, quoting the Mishnah, okay, we're going to look at the box as if it's filled with mustard seed. And voila, now, whether, again, according to Rebbe or the Rabbanan, as we had in the first machlekes in our Mishnah, when it's like something very small and a lot of it, whether it be hairs on the head or whether it be sand on the beach or whatever it is, here we have a bags full of mustard seeds, obviously a lot, whether it's going to be one long Naziris, like Rebbe says, or like Rabbanan, one after the other, the amount of that, either way, you're going to be a Nazir your whole entire life. Frag the Gemara, so the Gemara says, Vamai, why is he a Nazir for his whole life? Why don't you see that room, that box, whatever it is, kilo malaya, kishuin, vidaluin, filled with melons and gourds, vitahavale takanta, and then he'll have a remedy. Now, again, if you read this Gemara simply, it sounds like, okay, it'll be less, but it's much deeper, as Tais explains. It says the Gemara is asking on the Mishnah. Mishnah said that you see the box, the room, as if it's filled with mustard seed, and therefore there's no remedy for this person, because he's going to be for his whole life stuck in this situation because it's going to be so many. Now, says Tais, the truth is that the Gemara could have asked, why asking dafka melons? Why don't you ask that it's filled with dough? And if it's dough, they have these books where the woman was making dough and it filled up the whole house and it came out through this and took over the whole town, whatever. So maybe it's filled up with dough, and the person only had in mind for one naziris, and you could be makel. Says around we could have asked the same thing. We just mean to say that who said that it's mustard seed? Now, first, the Tais asked a question. He says, how could you be mekel misaf? What's the Gemara's question? It's a issa deraisa. Why are we being mekel misafik and saying, no, don't be stringent on him and say it's full of mustard seed? Be mekel. Say maybe interpret it in a linear way. Says Tais, yeah, because it's the Mishnah Masechtas Teiris that says Sofik Nazir is lahakol. So that's a klal, as we see in Tyrus, that when you have a doubt regarding Nazir, it's going to be lenient. Says Tais, really? What do you mean? Don't you remember what we had in the previous daf? Previous daf brought that if a guy says Mikan bat Seifa Ilam, the Gemara says, why are you saying it means only a Nazir for 30 days and it's just difficult for me? The Gemara says, what do you mean? You should say stringently, say this is what he meant, and he meant that whatever. Or the Gemara wants to say it in a stringent way. Why is the Gemara asking? I thought you said something Nazir is lahakol. Says, Tais is very important. Says, over there, when the Gemara asked to say it stringently, Mekan bat Seifa Olam, say, Yetaka, he's 500 years of Naziris, because that's how long it takes to get to the end of the world. That's because the Gemara didn't know any way of explaining what he meant to say in a lenient wording of what does it mean, Mekan bat Seifa Olam. The simple reading of that phrase would mean he accepted the Naziris from here to the end of the world. So whenever the Gemara asked, I would be lenient, but I don't know any other way of explaining what you mean from here to the end of the world. That definitely would seem that that's how big of a Naziris he's taking. So that's why the Gemara asked, so that's how long it should be. Let's say it's 30 days. But over here, the Gemara assumes that, and here it gets a little bit complex, the way Tais explains the Gemara's question, a person would not put himself in a situation to something that what's called sveikei chomim evadai. If you have something that the doubt, which you're in a situation of doubt, because you're being vague and ambiguous when you're saying, oh, maloya kuba, maloya bayis, a person would generally not put himself in a situation that the doubt should be more severe than the vadai. Because when you're going to be in doubt, you're going to be in a more stringent than had you accepted a definitive naziris, like if you had specified that I wanted this box or this room to be filled with mustard seed. That's actually, that vadai, which is what we're talking about over here, but we're saying misafik, that vadai is actually more lenient than the case of safik. Why? Because if you definitively took such a naziris, so it's going to be one after the other consecutive, but you're going to be able to cut your hair and bring a carbon between every single one. Now that we're mesupik of maybe it's melons or dough, what happens is the first time you cut your hair, you cannot go ahead and the next time bring a carbon, because maybe you had in mind for dough, and you had in mind only for one naziris, and then you can bring chulin to lazara. So therefore, that, the way Tais explains, is the Gemara's question that you don't have a takanta. He's asking, why are you telling me that this is what he means, maybe that of the mustard seed? But what do you mean? Now the guy is not misafik. It's chama mevada even. So the way Tais explained the Gemara's kasha is not the way you normally translate it. Is it? Come on, you're making it so long for him. Mustard seed, make it for melons. So you're saying no. You're telling me something that now could be any one of these, and now he has no takanta. So, but how could you tell me the guy would have in mind something that's safek chama mevadai? And you're telling me now it can mean either one of them? No, say it's definitively the melons, and then he'll have a takanta. But now he has no takanta. He has no way out. That's the Gemara's kasha according to Taisus. And that now, actually, according to Taisus, now the Gemara's answer reads very fluid. Amachezki says, "B'machloikis shenuya." Oh, you're right. This is a machloikis. V'Reb Shimon. And the Tana of our Mishnah is Reb Shimon. The Omer that he says a klal that's brought up in Shas, or the machnes asatz l'davar, a person would put himself into a situation where the doubt is more severe than what's definitive. So it's mamish. If you didn't have Taisus, you say, "What do you mean? That's not what I asked." You're okay. You're having a good shot, but according to the Taisus, that's exactly what the Gemara's question was. That you're saying maybe it's melons and maybe it's this. It has no takanta, but give him a takanta. Give him who? I would take a kabbalah, something that now I'm a supik and I'm going to be Muhammad and a vade of the mustard seed. So he says, yeah, it's like Rabbi Shimon. That's what Chizki is answering. Shimon holds a person would do that. You had no clue what you were saying. You were just saying Malay Habayis, Malay Kupa, and yeah, you're stuck. Your suffix is more chama than even if you were vade, the most severe type of kabbalah, you would have taken. To tell like learn the Bryce, Rabbi Shimon says such a concept. Someone says, Nazir, I am a Nazir, I'm an Asher, the guy, I'm very good at numbers, I'm an actuary, says, I'm going to be Nazir on the condition that in this pile there's 100 kor. Okay? Now we're going to check him out, we're going to see if his taka is so good, they're evaluating. They go and they find Shenigna V'Sha'avad. It's stolen or got lost. And we don't know if it had 100 kor or not. What's the halacha? His own Nazirus was dependent on if it had that number. So Shimon says, yes, you are forbidden, you have halacha abed Nazir. Why? Shesafik Nazira is lahachmer. Because the doubt of this Nazirus we're going to go stringent. Because we're concerned that maybe it was 100 kor. Now, later on, the Gemara is going to explain, the Gemara over there explains that there is a takanta for Reb Shimon that how do you get out of it? What do you do, Taka? This guy is a suffix, meaning he's aser, but we don't know if he really is a nazir. So, in a way, you would be stuck because you're aser, because you have to go stringently, but at the same time, you might not be. So the way you do it is before he starts counting his days of naziros, he makes the following stipulation. That if there was 100 kor and I am a nazir from my first statement, because it turns out that it really was, I just don't know because it got lost or stolen. So he says, I'm going to make up my neder, I'm bring my kabbalas. If it didn't have 100 kor, and therefore my first words had no substance, because I was only if I has 100 kor, so I'm going to take a neder of naziris now, and he'll be a nazir for 30 days, he'll bring his kabbalas, and there's no chum v'atzachah because he's nazir for 30 days, either from his first statement or from his last statement. That's what the takanta, the Gemara over there explains, you could do for Reb Shimon. So based on this, Tosis asks, he says, wait a second, what are you proving for Reb Shimon Sveike Chama Mevadai? That when it's Masupik, which is more Chama than Vadai, because you have no way about Reis Krichin, because it might be Chum Lazara, and if I'm proving for Reb Shimon that he holds Sveike Chama Mevadai, what are you talking about? He will be parted with one Naziris and one carbon, as if it had definitively 100 kor, because he'll make that tonight beforehand. So what's so Chama Mevadai when he says it's Asr? Says Taisus, what you could say is that it could come out to be a stringency if it's a suffix. Why? Let's say he became Tameh before he made the stipulation. Where now he's a suffix Nazir Tameh and he has no takanta because he cannot bring a Asham Tameh ala suffix because maybe he didn't have 100 kor and he'd be bringing Chunda Azar. And he's going to be forbidden in wine and to cut his hair forever because maybe he was a Nazir and he cannot exempt himself from Nazirs unless he brings the Asham of Tumah. And that cannot be brought al Tanai. But if, let's say, he became Tameh after he made a stipulation, then says Taisa, of course, he would be a Vadei Nazir Tameh, he would bring Asham Tameh, and he would go back and finish up with Nazirs. But what you see from Reb Shimon, the way Taisa explained, is if, let's say, he became Tameh beforehand, then you'd be stuck. There's nothing to do. We don't know if you were Nazir or not. can't bring chulin v'azah. And you see, still he says you can be aser because yes, a person will put himself in a situation that the safek is mechama mevadai. But Rabbi Yehuda matir, we just finished quoting that brisa, which is actually important because the next time is going to say it could even be Rabbi Yehuda. Yehuda says no, it's permitted. Shesafek nazir is lahakol because the doubt that you have nazirs will go leniently because a guy's not going to accept upon himself something only if he found 100 kor. And so in the Mishnah we see it as if it's filled with dough, and yeah, he parted with one nazir because according to Rabbi Yehuda. So the Tana of the Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda. The Tana of the Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon, who says, yes, the suffix, it's going to be Chama Mevadai. He says such a concept. That's one approach. That was Chizkiah. Rabbi Yechanan Amai says, I feel like you could even say the Tana of the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. That sounds pretty difficult. How could it be Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda says that when you come to a suffix, you're not going to say as a stringency, you're going to say as a leniency. So why are we saying when you see the box filled with mustard, when he said Malaya Kupa, we're going to see it as if maybe filled with mustard, maybe filled with melon, and therefore you're stuck and you have no way out. But that's not what Buddha says. Buddha says, you keep one naziris. So he says, I'll tell you why. There's a difference between the cases. There, in the case of when the guy says, I'm a Nazir, if there's 100 kur in this pile, he never came to a situation of acceptance of Nazirs at all. In other words, maybe they didn't have 100 kur. So we didn't start anything. So therefore we say, okay, we'll go lahakal. But but here he is coming on to a Naziris, in other words, in the Mishnah, by default, you have to be keeping at least one Naziris. Even if you can say the house or the room is filled with dough, you're going to have to keep at least one Naziris. Oh, so since you're coming onto a situation of Naziris, you cannot remove yourself. You're not going to be able to remove yourself, as the Gemara is going to explain. Why? What's the difference? The Gemara says, Amai loy, why can't he remove himself? What do you mean? L'chazi l'kupa, see the box, kila malei kishun v'dluin. As if it's filled with melon or gourds, or let's say filled with dough, and then he's going to have a remedy, because hasaka taitach, as the Gemara explains, the assumption is that nazirais hu dekibel lavei. In other words, let him go ahead and either way you look at it, cut his hair at the end of 30 days and bring a carbon, because, as we said, if he accepted upon himself one nazirais, let's say there was filled with dough or whatever, then okay, he's cutting here, fine. And even if you're saying that his neder included, because we're not sure, mustard seeds, no problem. You could cut after 30 days because the Gemara assumes that if he said it was filled with mustard seeds, it would be for nazirais. In other words, it would be for many nazirais that he's accepting upon himself. Not one long nazirais. Not like Rebbe, meaning Rabbi Yehuda, who we're discussing, would be holding like that of the Rabbanan. And since he cut his hair after 30 days. So then, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're not going to impose upon himself any more naziris, because who said he accepted upon himself mustard seeds? Maybe it was dough and he finished his neder. So essentially, says Tosfos, this would be exactly like the case of the pile, because the Rebbe says mutter, because he's not nachas lenaziris. Essentially, the way Tosfos explained the Gemara's question is that we're not sure that you take dough or melons or mustard. You just said molah kupa. So you're asking from Rabbi Yehuda that how could he be the Tana of Mishnah? He says with the suffix lahakal. He said here in our Mishnah said suffix lahachmer. So that Chizkiah says, it says Rabbi Yechanan that no. The difference is that over there in the case of the 100 kur, we weren't nachas lenaziris. We didn't start any naziris yet. So maybe we'll go lahakal. Here in our Mishnah, you have to at least be one nazir. So if you already started, then we're not going to be able to interpret that leniently. But that's the Gemara's question, is saying, what do you mean? Even if it's, let's say, dough, so you have to be, but the moment you finish that one, before you start the next one, that's loy nachas. I didn't start, I finished already that first naziris, which may have been dough. Now, I don't know if I have more. So it's not like I started, I'm in the middle of something, how did I get out of it? It's like a new thing. So it's just the same thing like the 100 quarts, like a new thing. So who said that I'm going to be, why should it be, how could you say the Tana of Mishnah Rabbi Yehuda, why should it be any different than his case of the 100 quart? So that's the Gemara continues on Beis and says, no, because Rabbi Yehuda Savala Kirabi. Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi that said in our Mishnah, in the case of, let's say, mustards, seeds, that just like the case of the here, the opening case of our Mishnah, of our Daf, here or sand or dirt, where Rebbe had disagreed with the Tana Kama, and he said that it's one long Naziris, and that until the day he dies he cannot cut his hair, so therefore here also obviously means one Naziris. So even if it was dough, so if you're going to go ahead and say that he has halach of Naziris, which by default you have to have some Naziris, because something, the room is filled with something, so even according to Rabbi Yehuda, you cannot remove yourself, because maybe it was mustard seed, and if it's maybe mustard seed, that's going to go to the day that you die, one long one. So you cannot compare it to the case of the Braisa where he didn't start anything. Here, bistin mitten. You don't know. Does it continue? Does it end? I don't know. Oh, okay, so then Rabbi Yechon has a good point. Therefore, that's why the halacha of the Mishnah could be Rabbi Yehuda. We will go l'chumra, even though the Braisa says l'kula, because here, bistin mitten. You're stuck. Versus over there, where you didn't start, maybe you could go l'kula. So Rabbi Yechonon still stands correct that it could be like Rabbi Yehuda. It's not like we learn in the Mishnah. What's this that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi? As we quoted already, Rabbi Yomi, he says, he disagrees with Tana Kama. He says, when a guy says, Nazir, Tana Kama says, you cut every 30 days. Rabbi says, no. Since you said Nazir, not Nazirais, it's going to be one long one. And that's really the main halacha we want to compare Rabbi Yehuda to. He says, but what's the case when he cuts it every 30 days? That's Nazirais. He says in the plural. It's upon me Nazirais kisareishi, the amount of Nazirais as the hairs on my head. Or it's like the dust in the earth, or kachaliyam, the sand on the sea. So okay, fine. Therefore, Rabbi Yechonon is still correct. The problem is, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda misabla Rabbi? Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold a Rabbi that says that when you say, let's say, this house filled with mustard seeds, it's one long one, not many different individual Nazirais of as the amount of mustards there are? But Vatanan, we learn in the Mishnah, in our own Mishnah, the Mishnah says, let's say someone says, I am a Nazir according to the days of the year, as the Bach fills in the words. So we said you count Naziris according to the number of the days of the solar year, etc. And then the Mishnah concludes on right after that halacha says these words. Omer Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, there was a story that happened. And once he finished it, he died. That's the halacha, last halacha of our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, this Rabbi Yehuda. If you say, you just told me that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe, who says that when you say something, you don't say many, you say one long one. That was the prior halacha in our Mishnah, the first halacha. You tell me it means one long one. But the Gemara says, but that's not going to make sense. Because Rabbi Yehuda himself in our own Mishnah says, so the Gemara explains. If you say he holds not like what you're trying to say, when he takes something, it's many Nazirais. So anytime I could understand what he means in the Mishnah when he says, the kivan to hishlim mes. That when this guy who had taken such Naziris finished it, he died. In other words, that there's two interpretations in Taisus. First one that he says is, in other words, that the term hishlim would be appropriate if you say it's Naziris harbe, where you finish that quota and then he died. But if you say, as you're trying to say, that he holds like Rebbe, that it would be chadad Nazirais, one long one, that's what Kibbutz Levi accepted upon himself. Miyav Ashlam Klal, which again, according to the first interpretation of Taisus, means to say, can you use the terminology of hashlama, of completing? But it's one Nazirais. It's not a cut is here as long as the a solar year, and therefore, according to the first interpretation of Taisus, that's not a hashlama. Wouldn't be an appropriate type of terminology. That's the first pshat. It's not hashlama. Hashlama sounds like there was a quota. This is one thing. It's not a quota. So that's one pshat. Another pshat is iyam et b'shlemet. The words are not here, but the Rabbi Shloimy explains. It's another interpretation of what the Gemara is saying. If you're going to say, according to Yehuda, that he accepted upon himself many Naziros, not like the way you're trying to say, like the Chacham. So that's the reason is that since he's mashlim, 365 times 30 days, then he died, like the halacha, the Tana Kama that says that you count the number of Naziris according to the number of days in the solar year, so that would make sense. That's a pretty long time. But if you say it was one Naziris, do you think his Hashlama is going to be like the Hashlama Tana Kama? And if it's not, if it's telling me it's like Rabbi, so then it's a Maisalista. because Rabbi Yehuda is brought right after the story of the halacha Tanna Kama, and he says a Maisa Hoya that sounds like it's bringing a raya to the halacha of the Tanna Kama, but it's not. It sounds like that you'd be contradicting the Tosfos likes this first interpretation. So be that as it may, whether it's the wording of a Shlomo because it wouldn't make sense that it was such a long time, be that as it may, it sounds like not like what you're trying to tell me. It sounds like Rabbi Yehuda holds like the Chachamim, that when you say something, you mean many of them, not one long one. And you just told me that the way you were rationalizing to say why your question is not the same, because you wanted to say he holds like Rebbe, and therefore now Mishnah, you're middle of something. You're not starting a new thing. But it seems to be not like that from Yehuda in our own Mishnah. That's question number one. Void, another question says the Gemara, Misav like Rebbe, does Rebbe really hold like Rebbe? But Tanya in the Brisa. The Brisa says, Rabbi Yehuda says, Haleni Nazir minyan hilkati kayitz. What's hilkati kayitz? So Tais says is when they would dry up the figs, they would make all these huge mountains, these mounds of figs to dry up. It was like an unlimited amount. And the guy says, that's how much of a nazir I'm going to be according to the number of these hilkati kayitz. Or minyan shvili shmita, or like the number of paths in the Shemitah year, which, as Tais explains, since the fields are not planted during the Shemitah year, so there's so many paths that they had over there because everyone's cutting through whatever. So there's like an inordinate amount of these paths. So says Rabbi Yehuda, says the Rabbi Yehuda, Meina Nazirais Kamini Hilkati Kayetz or Kamini Shvili Shmita. That's how many number of Nazirais, according to the number of paths or according to the number of figs, that's how many 30-day Naziris he's going to be taking of his Nazir. So you see that obviously, again, another question pointing to the same idea. According to Yehuda, it's not one long one according to that amount. It's each one is an individual unit. It's going to be Naziris. But that contradicts that you wanted to tell me that Rabbi Yechanan, to resolve the question of how Rabbi Yehuda can be telling about Mishnah, is called like Rabbi, you see, he holds like Rabban. So the Gemara, no, you're missing a very important point. Because minyan shani, a number is different. In other words, if you use the word minyan, most definitely you're accepting upon yourself a quota of many different naziris. What we were saying was when you say kachard, like mustard seed or kehilkite, and you didn't mention the word minyan, oh yes, then Rabbi Yehuda would hold like Rabbi that it's one long naziris. So therefore, you're missing one critical word. Therefore, over there he says many different ones because the word minyan. Says the Gemara, does Rebbe really differentiate between minyan? As Tais explains, the Gemara assumes, since you tell me Rebbe Yehuda holds like Rebbe, and he says there's a difference between minyan, or if it doesn't say minyan, the Gemara is assuming that Rebbe would also hold like Rebbe Yehuda, and that he would also differentiate between minyan, not minyan. So therefore the Gemara says, is that really so that Rebbe differentiates regarding the word minyan? But Vatanya learned the Brisa. It says, Areini Nazir, Kiminyan, Yemaisachama. If someone says, I am a Nazir according to the number of the days of a solar year. So the Tanna Kama says, Maida Nazir is Kiminyan Meisachama. Okay, that's how many Nazirs you have to count. 365 times 30. Let's say it's Kamei Levana like a lunar year. Monday Kamei Levana, you have to do according to the lunar year. Now, Rabbi Omer, he disagrees. He says, no. Only if you say in the plural Nazirais, not Nazir. Wait a second, but the Bryce is talking about a case when you said minyan. And you see that still Rabbi holds it's not going to be individual ones. It's going to be one long one, even though you use the word minyan. Says the Gemara, not like the way we assume. Yes, Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi in one area, but he disagrees with him in another one, as the Gemara explains. He holds like him in one of them, meaning this is Chad Naziris Kibbul that he accepts upon himself one Naziris when you say Chardal. Then you say Acheni Nazir Kechardal, it's going to be one long one. But a Pag he disagrees with him on one of them. Rabbi Yehuda, he differentiates between if you use the word of number of counting, as we explained. But Rabbi does not differentiate between minyan or not. So again, we essentially resolved Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan wanted to say that the Chizki, the first shot, made sense. The town of our Mishnah is Reb Shimon. Because it makes sense, because it's going to be a situation of Sefek Chamim Evadai. And who says such a thing? Oh, Reb Shimon. Said Rabbi Yechanan, no, you could even say the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda. How could you say? Didn't we quote in the Brisa when the guy says, I'm not sure if there's 100 core, and if it is, I'll be a Nazir. Then you go lahakal. How could you say in our Mishnah Chumra that you're going to say that maybe it's mustard seed, maybe it's melons, maybe it's dough, and you're going to say all of them, and that's more chama than the vadai? Yeah, it could be. How? It's a stira? Not a stira. because there he's nachas lenaziris in the halacha of our Mishnah, a hype shenon. And then now in the Brisa he didn't. Says the Gemara, what are you talking about? The Mishnah also didn't start. When he finishes the first one, now it's like starting again. That's the same question. No, he holds the Rebbe, that it's one long one. You're middle of that thing, so you didn't get out of it. Then we'll go to Chumrah. But here, you didn't start, then we'll go to Kula. It's very different if you started something, you didn't start. And then the Gemara was discussing, really? He holds like Rebbe? No, yeah. He could hold like him. He holds like him. You use the word minyan, it's different. Rebbe doesn't hold minyan. That Rebbe doesn't hold like Rebbe Yehuda. They hold the same thing when you say without the word minyan, but not necessarily with the word minyan. Now, related to the halacha of the Mishnah, the Gemara says, Tan Rabbanan. Someone said, we learned the Brisa, someone says, Hareini Nazir. Kol Yemei Chaya. I'm a Nazir for all the days of my life. Oh, Hareini Nazir Olam. I'm a Nazir, I'm an eternal Nazir. So halacha is, he's a Nazir Olam. So he's an eternal Nazir, meaning like Avshalom, and every 30 days or whatever it is, each town, according to their opinion, how often they can lighten the load of his hair. Now, let's say it says, Afila Meishon, even 100 years, Afila Elsham, or even 1,000 years. Oh, when we quoted this once before, in the Nazir Olam. Here's not going to be an eternal Nazir, El Nazir Le'olam, a Nazir forever, which means to say he cannot cut his hair, and he cannot lighten it till the day that he dies. Again, it's related to halacha of the Mishnah in the sense of, like we're saying, is it one long Nazirs or is it separate Naziris? That's really the point over here that we're differentiating between Avshalom and that Nazir Olam or Nazir Le'olam. A Nazir Olam could cut his hair as often as he needs to and it gets too heavy. Nazir Le'olam, no, it's one long one, so it's very similar to that discussion in halacha of the Mishnah. Now, Tanarban will in the Brisa, someone says, Hareini Nazir ve'achas. I'm a Nazir and one. So, minus time, he's got to count two Naziris, because since he added on the word ve'achas, and one, so that's another one. Let's say he says ve'oid, so then he has to add on and count minus shalosh. He has to count three Naziris, because you said Nazir ve'achas ve'oid. That's 1 and 2 and 3. Let's say he says v'shuv nachamo. Minus arba has to count a fourth time. Says Gemara Pshita. This seems to be obvious. What's the chiddush in this halacha? Says Gemara Ma'odem. What would you say? B'shuv kikulu. When you say untzerek, tzerek mean okay. Ma'aytchanon von oneib nachamo. Right. So you would say v'aveleshis. When he said 3 times, it says nazir v'achas v'oid. You did 3, and he said b'shuv. You would think it 3 times 2, not 4. You have to be 6. Kamashmon delay. It was saying no. The word b'shuv is not going to be saying the whole thing over again. It would just be another one. Continue with this number 1, 2, 3, 4. If someone says, I'm a Nazir. So some Chazami says like this. If you said the word hen, that would mean achas. In other words, the word hen is, the Gemara says in Shabbos of Laman Aleph, is in the Greek wording, they call one hina. So if you say hen, that means 1. If you say digun, so that's time, that's 2. Trigun, like try, is shalish, that's 3. Tetragon is arba, is 4. Pentagon is chamesh, is 5. These are Greek words that mean different numbers. And again, that's how many nazirs you can accept. One last unrelated halacha, but it just relates to this idea about these Greek words. If you have a round house, or digun, or a house that has 2 walls, or trigun has 3, it's a triangle house, or pentagon, which we all know, the 5-walled house, does not contaminate for the halacha of Nagoyim. Why? Because since it doesn't have just 4-cornered, a 4-walled house, it's not going to contaminate Nagoyim, as the Gemara is going to conclude from kiris, and that's really all the halacha, circle or 3, whatever it is, it just doesn't have 4, as the Gemara explains. But tetrakin mitam Nagoyim, if it's a full-walled house, it's mitam Nagoyim. It says Gemara my time. What's the reason? So the Gemara says, Lamatu Oimer. This is all in the parsha of Nagoyim. In Vayikra Perik Yudal, Pasuk Lamates, the Pasuk says the Kohen is going to come back on the 7th day and he's going to see, and the nega spread bikirois habayis. So it could have said kir, the wall. What kirois? It's plural. That's 2. Lamalahu and the Pasuk before that, 2 psukim before that said that he's going to see the nega, and then the nega is going to be bikirois habayis, in the walls of the house. Here also kir kirois. It could have said wall. It said walls. So when you said 2 times plural of 2, is 2 plus 2 is 4, harikan arba, that tells us that there's going to be 4 walls in the house, and therefore again that we just brought it in because the numbers relates to that, the numbers of Naziris. Hadnach kol kenui, we shall return to the first parak of Masechtas Nazir parak kol kenui, which again spoke about primarily the halachas of when you have different wordings and deviations of what is your Kabbalah, and that's what we're going to continue in the next stuff. And that's also the same idea about different ways of acceptance of the Naziris. Thank you to Anytime for hosting us.